Commander Lee Jun felt completely alone as he watched the research ship fly away into the red sky of Nexus 9. Blood dripped from the cut on his head. The Galdorian scientists he had worked with for 3 years left him behind when earthquakes made the planet dangerous. They didn't even look back, Lee said quietly. His broken leg hurt badly under the simple splint he had made from expedition tools. His emergency signal device was broken under rocks from the earthquake. Night was coming quickly on this strange world. His equipment showed that dangerous metal particles would soon fill the air. Lee pulled himself toward the small caves they had been exploring before the earthquake. Every movement caused pain, but his human will to survive kept him moving forward. Lee needed shelter quickly. The Galdorians had warned that Nexus 9's atmosphere became toxic when the planet's 3 moons aligned, which would happen in just a few hours. He had only his damaged environment suit, some basic tools, and the knowledge that humans were considered physically weak by most galactic species. "Should have left me a ship," Lee muttered through gritted teeth as he crawled over sharp rocks, or at least better supplies. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for his shoulders. Inside, the temperature dropped quickly. Lee's breath formed clouds in the cold air. His leg throbbed with each heartbeat, but he couldn't stop moving deeper into the cave. The toxic air would reach the entrance soon. For hours, Lee crawled through dark tunnels, using his failing wrist light to guide him. His water supply was almost gone. The pain made it hard to think clearly. Several times, he nearly passed out, only to be startled awake by the sharp sound of rocks falling nearby. By the second day, fever made Lee confused. He talked to people who weren't there, his team back on Earth, the Galdorian scientists who abandoned him, even his long-dead parents. His food was gone. The water had run out hours ago. His suit's oxygen recycler was failing. "Keep moving," he told himself. "Just keep moving." On the 3rd day, Lee didn't know if he was still alive or if he was experiencing the last dreams of a dying mind. The tunnel he followed suddenly opened into a vast underground space. His failing light couldn't show how big it was. Lee collapsed at the edge, expecting this to be his final resting place. As consciousness slipped away, he noticed something strange. There was light coming from somewhere below. When Lee woke up, he thought he had died. All around him, soft blue light pulsed from crystal formations growing from the walls and ceiling of an enormous cavern. The air felt different here, cleaner, somehow. His fever had broken, though the pain in his leg remained intense. "What is this place?" Lee wondered aloud, his voice echoing. As his eyes adjusted, Lee realized he wasn't in a natural cave. The walls were too smooth, the floor too level. This was something built by intelligent hands, or whatever appendages the builders had possessed. In the center of the chamber stood structures that could only be machines. They were unlike any technology Lee had seen before, not human, not Galdorian, not from any species known to the Galactic Commonwealth. The designs were elegant curves of metal that seemed to flow like liquid, covered in symbols that shifted as he looked at them. Lee dragged himself closer, fascinated despite his pain and hunger. The Commonwealth believed this planet had never supported advanced life. Yet here was evidence of a civilization far beyond current galactic technology. When Lee was about 10 meters from the nearest structure, it changed. The symbols glowed brighter, and parts of the machine began to move, rearranging themselves like a puzzle solving itself. "Hello," Lee called out, not really expecting an answer. Instead of words, a soft humming filled the air. A panel slid open on the side of the machine closest to Lee. Curiosity overcame caution. He pulled himself the final distance and reached out to touch the smooth surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the blue light pulsed strongly. The humming changed tone. The symbols on the machine rearranged themselves rapidly. "What are you?" Lee whispered, tracing the strange patterns with his fingertips. To his amazement, the machine responded. The panel under his hand warmed slightly. A gentle vibration traveled up his arm. Somehow, Lee understood that the machine was scanning him, learning about him. Another panel opened nearby, revealing what looked like a small medical chamber. Lee didn't know how he knew this, but he felt certain the machine was offering help. "Can you help me survive?" Lee asked, hope rising for the first time since he'd been abandoned. The humming changed again, becoming almost musical. Lee took it as a yes. With the last of his strength, he pulled himself into the chamber. The pain in his leg was unbearable now, but something told him that was about to change. As the chamber closed around him, Lee's last conscious thought was that being abandoned might not be the end of his story after all. It might be just the beginning. 6 months had passed since Commander Lee Jun was left for dead on Nexus 9. The Galactic Commonwealth had officially recorded the event as the unfortunate loss of human ambassador Lee Jun in the Nexus 9 incident. Senior researcher Cole wrote in his report that leaving the human behind was regrettable but necessary given the specimen's fragility. In the depths of the ancient cave system, Lee would have laughed at being called fragile. His broken leg had healed, though not perfectly. He walked with a noticeable limp that worsened when he was tired. But he was alive, and his mind worked better than ever before. Lee sat cross-legged on the smooth floor of what he now called the control chamber. Around him, blue-white light pulsed from crystal formations that responded to his presence. He wore clothes made from his old uniform, combined with strange, lightweight materials he had found in storage compartments within the cave system. Not bad for a fragile specimen, Lee said to himself as he worked on a complex crystal node in front of him. The first month after discovering the ancient technology had been the hardest. The healing chamber had repaired the worst of his injuries, but Lee still faced the challenge of finding food and clean water. The ancient machines, which Lee now knew belonged to a civilization called the Precursors, had been inactive for thousands of years. Through trial and error, Lee had learned to activate various systems. He discovered the machines responded to his touch in ways he couldn't fully explain. Sometimes he felt almost as if they could read his intentions rather than just his physical actions. "Tried to make sense of that, Cole," Lee muttered as he carefully adjusted a connection in the crystal node. Where Galdorian scientists would have followed strict procedures and extensive testing protocols, Lee worked on instinct. He made changes based on what felt right, on patterns he noticed in how the systems responded. Each day brought new discoveries. The central chamber where he had first encountered the technology now served as both his laboratory and living space. Lee had managed to activate water purification systems, air recyclers, and even food synthesizers that could create nutrient pastes compatible with human biology. The taste was terrible, but it kept him alive and healthy. Pain was still part of Lee's daily life. Both the physical pain from his imperfectly healed injuries and the emotional pain of betrayal. At night, he often dreamed of the Galdorian ship disappearing into the crimson sky, leaving him behind without a second thought. Some days the pain is a good teacher, Lee said as he stretched his stiff leg. Lee had discovered that the cave system extended far deeper into the planet than anyone had suspected. The precursor installation was vast, with dozens of interconnected chambers. Many remained dormant, their purposes unknown. But each week, Lee activated more systems and expanded his understanding of the ancient technology. Today marked his most ambitious attempt yet. For weeks, he had been working to restore what appeared to be a communication array in the center of the main chamber. The crystalline structure rose from floor to ceiling, with branches extending outward like a tree made of light and metal. "Last connection," Lee said, carefully inserting a small crystal fragment into an open socket in the main trunk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft click echoed through the chamber as the crystal locked into place. The entire structure began to hum with new energy. The light pulsing through the crystal formations changed from blue to a bright white, almost too intense to look at directly. Lee stepped back, shielding his eyes. The humming grew louder, and then suddenly, the air in the center of the chamber shimmered. A holographic display expanded outward from the central pillar, filling the space with stars, planets, and connection lines between them. "It worked," Lee whispered in amazement. The star map rotated slowly, showing thousands of points of light. Some were connected by lines that pulsed with energy, while others remained dim. Lee recognized some of the star configurations from his studies of galactic cartography, but many were completely unfamiliar. As he watched, symbols appeared next to certain points on the map, the same symbols he had seen throughout the installation. Lee had learned to recognize some of them, including the one that he believed represented the precursors themselves. "Is this a subspace communication array?" Lee asked aloud, moving closer to examine the display. The map zoomed in response to his question, focusing on one particular star system, the one containing Nexus 9. A panel of controls materialized within Lee's reach, glowing with soft light. Lee's hands trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the controls. If this truly was a communication array, it could change everything. He could contact the Commonwealth, reveal what he had found, perhaps even call for rescue. But a different idea formed in Lee's mind. The Galdorians and other species saw humans as weak, fragile creatures barely worth noticing in the grand scheme of galactic politics. This technology, this precursor legacy that responded to him in ways it apparently hadn't responded to other species, could change that perception forever. "Time to let the galaxy know humans aren't so fragile after all," Lee said, his fingers moving across the holographic controls with growing confidence. As he activated the communication system, a wave of energy pulsed outward from Nexus 9, traveling along dormant pathways that had been silent for millennia. Somewhere in the darkness of space, other precursor installations would be awakening, responding to a signal they had been programmed to recognize. Lee smiled. His abandonment had not been the end. It had been the beginning of something much bigger than himself. The spaceship Dawning Light moved slowly through the darkness of space. On the bridge, Captain Kim Sun stood with his arms crossed, staring at the main screen in disbelief. "Impossible," he said, shaking his head. "No one can survive on Nexus 9. The air is toxic. Nothing has lived there since the planet started dying hundreds of years ago." His science officer, Park Ji, worked quickly at her station. Her fingers flew over the control panel as she studied the strange signal they had received. "But the facts are clear," she said, looking up with excitement in her eyes. "This transmission has human biological markers. It also has Commonwealth identification codes. It's him, the human diplomat who was left behind." The Terry people were known across the galaxy for being careful, logical researchers. They studied everything thoroughly before making conclusions. But this situation was like nothing they had faced before. A human, surviving alone on a deadly world, somehow using ancient technology that even the advanced Terry civilization had never been able to make work. "Could it be a trick?" asked Captain Kim. "Perhaps the Galdorians are testing us." Park Ji shook her head. "The signal is too complex to fake. And why would the Galdorians pretend to be a human they abandoned? It would only make them look bad." After much discussion, Captain Kim made his decision. The Dawning Light changed course and headed for Nexus 9. 3 days later, they entered orbit around the red planet. The ship's sensors detected strange energy patterns coming from below the surface, patterns that should not exist on a dead world. "The energy readings are similar to other precursor sites we studied," Park Ji reported, "but much stronger and more active." They sent a message down to the surface, and to their surprise, they received an answer almost immediately. A human voice, rough from lack of use, gave them coordinates for a safe landing spot and instructions for dealing with the toxic atmosphere. A small team prepared to go down to the planet. They wore special suits to protect them from the poisonous air. Park Ji led the team, her heart beating fast with excitement as their small shuttle landed on the red soil of Nexus 9. The cave entrance was hidden among tall rocks. As they approached, a figure stepped out to meet them. He walked with a noticeable limp and was thinner than a human should be, but he was very much alive. "Welcome to my humble home," said Lee Jun, his voice scratchy and rough. He wore a strange combination of his old uniform and materials they didn't recognize. Despite his obvious physical pain and hard life, his eyes were bright and alert. There was something in his gaze that made the Terry scientists uncomfortable, a fierce determination they rarely saw in other species. Park Ji could hardly contain her scientific curiosity as Lee led them into the cave system. The walls glowed with soft blue light from crystal formations. Ancient technology hummed with active energy all around them. "How did you make the precursor systems work?" Park Ji asked, examining the modified technology with amazement. "Our people have studied similar ruins for many generations without success." Lee laughed, a sound that held both warmth and pain. "Maybe you were too careful. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. When staying alive is your only choice, you learn to try things that seem impossible." The Terry team spent hours with Lee, growing more fascinated with each new discovery. The human showed them how he had connected different systems, how he had survived by adapting the ancient technology to meet his needs. His approach was nothing like their careful scientific methods. He took risks, made intuitive leaps, and somehow made things work that shouldn't have worked. "The most important discovery is this," Lee said, leading them to the central chamber. There, a massive holographic display showed a map of the galaxy with thousands of points of light connected by energy lines. "It's a communication network. These points are all precursor installations spread across the entire galaxy. Many have been sleeping for thousands of years, but they can be awakened." Park Ji immediately understood what this meant. "This is incredible," she whispered. "With this network, communication across the galaxy would be instant. Travel between systems could be revolutionized." Her excitement faded quickly as she realized something else. "The Galdorian Confederacy will never let this remain independent," she warned Lee. "They claim this entire sector as their territory. They'll want to control this technology." Lee's face hardened. His friendly expression disappeared, replaced by something colder and more determined. "Let them come," he said quietly. "They already took everything from me except my humanity. And that's the one thing they've always underestimated." Later that night, after sending their initial reports back to Terry scientists, Park Ji found Lee sitting alone, watching the holographic galaxy spin slowly in the center of the chamber. "Why did you contact us?" she asked. "You could have stayed hidden." Lee looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. "Because humans aren't meant to be alone. We're stronger together than apart. And because the precursors left this technology for everyone, not just for one species to control." "The Galdorians don't share that view," Park Ji said. Lee nodded. "I know. That's why I needed allies who understand the value of knowledge over power." He smiled slightly. "And I was getting tired of talking to myself." As Park Ji prepared to return to the ship, she realized that this human represented something that Terry had never truly understood before, how desperation and abandonment could sometimes create a strength that careful planning could not match. The human variable, unpredictable and adaptive, had changed everything. The Galdorian warship Dominance appeared suddenly in the space near Nexus 9. It was huge and dark, with weapons ready to fire. Its commander, Archenvel, stood on the bridge with anger in his 4 eyes. The reports about Terry ships in this area had made him furious. This was Galdorian territory, claimed by their people many years ago. But what made Vel even angrier was the news that the human they had left behind was still alive. Not only alive, but somehow controlling ancient precursor technology that the Galdorians had never been able to use. "This is impossible," Vel said to his second-in-command. "The human should have died within days, and no one can make precursor technology work. We've tried for centuries." Vel ordered his communications officer to send a message to both the planet's surface and the small Terry science ship that orbited Nexus 9. "This is Archenvel of the Galdorian Confederacy," he said in his deep, rumbling voice. "Surrender the human and all research data immediately. The Nexus 9 installation belongs to the Galdorian Confederacy by right of discovery." There was no answer from the planet. The Terry ship responded only to say they were guests of the human ambassador and had no control over the situation. "They mock us," Vel said, his skin changing from blue to purple with rage. "Prepare attack ships. We will take what is ours by force." Deep below the surface of Nexus 9, Li Jun stood in the control chamber. The holographic display showed him the Guldorian warship and the smaller Terry science vessel. 6 months ago, he had been at the mercy of the Guldorians. Now the situation was very different. "They're launching attack ships," Park Ji said, watching the display with worry. "The dawning light has no weapons. They'll destroy it." Li didn't answer with words. Instead, he placed his hands on the crystal control panel. The blue light pulsed under his touch. He closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts on what needed to happen. Across the planet's surface, ancient systems began to wake up. Devices that had been sleeping for thousands of years activated all at once. As the Guldorian attack ships flew toward the Terry vessel, something amazing happened. A shield of energy appeared around the Terry ship. Another shield formed over the cave entrance. The Guldorian weapons fired, but their energy beams disappeared into the shields without causing any damage. On the bridge of the Dominance, Arch and Vel watched in shock as his attack failed completely. "Impossible," he shouted, his voice echoing across the bridge. "How does the human controlling planetary defenses? No single mind should be able to work with precursor systems." He didn't understand the truth. Li wasn't controlling the systems through force, as the Guldorians would have tried to do. Instead, he had learned to work with the technology, creating a relationship based on cooperation rather than control. The semi-intelligent systems responded to his intentions, amplifying what he wanted to accomplish. "Fire again. Use all weapons," Vel ordered. The Dominance fired its main weapons. The energy beam was powerful enough to break a small moon apart, but when it hit the shields around the Terry ship, it simply disappeared. The shields glowed brighter for a moment, then returned to normal. News of what was happening spread quickly through Commonwealth communication channels. Many species had suffered under Guldorian expansion over the years. They watched with growing hope as a single human and ancient technology stood against the powerful Guldorian warship. Vel was now desperate. He ordered 3 assault shuttles to enter the planet's atmosphere. They would land and capture the installation by force. The shuttles were filled with Guldorian soldiers in protective suits, ready to fight. In the control chamber, Li saw what was happening. He faced a difficult choice. The precursor defense systems could easily destroy the incoming shuttles. With a thought, he could kill everyone on those ships. "They're trying to reach us," Park Ji said, watching the display. "What will you do?" Li placed his hands once more on the control panel. The crystal hummed under his touch. Above the planet's surface, new energy fields formed. The Guldorian shuttles hit these fields and found themselves pushed away from their intended landing zone. No matter how hard the pilots tried, they couldn't break through. Eventually, all 3 shuttles were forced to land far from the cave entrance, in a safe but useless location. Captain Kim Sun contacted Li from the dawning light. "Why did you spare them?" he asked through the communication system. "They would not show you the same mercy if they had the power." Li's face appeared on the captain's screen. Despite everything, the human looked calm and determined. "Because showing them who we really are is more powerful than proving we can kill like they do," Li answered simply. "Humans are not defined by how well we destroy our enemies, but by how we choose to act when we have power over others." In the place where the Guldorian shuttles had landed, confused soldiers waited for new orders. Their sensors showed that the air was less toxic in this area than it should have been, as if something was cleaning the atmosphere around them. Inside the Dominance, Arch and Vel struggled to understand what was happening. In all his years commanding Guldorian forces, he had never faced a situation like this. Their weapons were useless. Their soldiers couldn't reach the target, and it was all because of a human they had thought too weak to survive. "What are your orders, Arkin?" his second-in-command asked. Vel stared at the planet on the main screen. Something important was changing in the galaxy, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what to do next. 1 year had passed since what people across the galaxy now called the Nexus Intervention. Commander Lee Jun stood before the newly formed Council of Independent Systems. The large meeting hall was filled with representatives from 27 different species. Many of them had once been enemies. Now they sat together as partners. Lee looked different than he had 1 year ago. His body had healed greatly thanks to Terry medical treatments. He no longer looked thin and sick. The limp from his broken leg was less noticeable, though it would never fully go away. Some scars would always remain, both on his body and in his mind. The precursor network was never created to be a weapon, Lee told the gathered representatives. He spoke slowly and clearly so the translation systems could keep up. It was built as a way for different civilizations to talk to each other across great distances. Its power comes from connecting people, not from destroying them. The discovery of the ancient communication network had changed everything in galactic politics. For centuries, the Galdorian Confederacy had been the strongest power in this part of the galaxy. They had taken what they wanted from weaker species. But now, smaller star systems had joined together under the protection of reactivated precursor technology. The Galdorians were no longer the strongest voice in galactic affairs. The story of Lee's survival and what he discovered had spread to every inhabited world. No one talked anymore about abandoning weaker species. Lee had shown that being physically strong wasn't the only kind of strength that mattered. Humanity does not want to control others, Lee continued, looking around at the representatives. We want to understand. When the Galdorians left me on Nexus 9, they taught me the most important lesson of my life. That pain can either destroy us or change us for the better. I chose to let it change me. The council meeting ended with everyone signing the Nexus Accords. This new agreement set up rules for shared defense and technology exchange between species that used to compete or even fight with each other. When the council offered Lee a position of leadership in the new alliance, he surprised everyone by saying no. Later that day, Park Ji found Lee packing his few belongings in his room on the space station. "Are you really sure about this?" she asked. Park Ji had become both a trusted colleague and a good friend during the past year. "You could have any job you want in the new alliance. Why go back to Nexus 9? Lee looked up from his packing and smiled. "I need to go back. There's still so much work to do." Through the window, they could see Nexus 9. The planet looked different now. The toxic red atmosphere was slowly clearing as precursor atmospheric processors worked to clean the air. Research teams from a dozen different species now worked together on the planet's surface, studying the ancient technology. "I was abandoned there in pain," Lee said quietly. "And that abandonment changed everything. Not just for me, but for all of us. The work we started isn't finished yet." 3 days later, Park Ji's shuttle approached the main research base on Nexus 9. The landscape around the cave entrance had changed dramatically in the past year. Buildings now surrounded the cave mouth. Scientists from many worlds worked side by side to understand the precursor technology. "I still don't understand why you want to come back here," Park Ji said as they walked toward the cave entrance. "After everything that happened to you here." Lee stopped and looked around at the activity. "This is exactly where I need to be," he said. "Not because of what happened in the past, but because of what can happen in the future." Inside the cave system, they made their way to the central chamber where everything had begun. The communication array still stood in the center, now surrounded by research equipment. Lee sat down before the control panel. His leg hurt a bit, as it always did when he was tired, a reminder of what he had been through. "When I first found this place, I was alone and dying," Lee said. "I didn't know if I would survive another day. Now look at what's happened." The holographic display showed thousands of points of light across the galaxy. Each one was a precursor site waiting to be found. Some had already been activated. Others still slept, waiting for someone to wake them. "Before the Galdorians left me here, I was just one human diplomat among many," Lee said. "Now I've helped change the galaxy. Sometimes being abandoned is just the beginning of finding your true path. As Park Ji watched, Lee placed his hands on the control panel. The familiar blue light pulsed under his touch. On the display, a new point of light began to glow. "There," Lee said, pointing to the light. "Another precursor site just activated on a planet in the Andorian system. Let's see what we can learn from it together." Lee smiled. The pain and loneliness he had felt when first abandoned on this planet seemed very far away now. In their place was something much more powerful, hope for a future where no species would be abandoned or thought of as too weak to matter. Sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the greatest changes, not just for one person, but for everyone. The end.